we can't see joy. Without it, we can't. It's the yin and yang, And so learning to embrace pain. And then we chatted about that concept later. I said, I made its way into a tune.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm pleased as always to be here with you. I've just spent an hour with the amazing Scottie Miller. Look, all of our interviews are more than worth listening to, and Scottie's definitely falls into that category. Scottie's had an amazing career, initially starting out in jazz and classical and going through to being Ruthie Foster's musical director and keyboard player for well over a decade. An amazing solo career, and with his trio and other outfits, there is just so much to chat here. Scottie, to his huge credit, is also incredibly open about his previous challenges with addiction and depression and the impacts that had on creativity and playing, and how he evolved beyond those addictions in recovery. So if that's an area of concern or interest for you, that alone makes the discussion with Scottie worth checking out. But there is, an amazing music career here, and I highly recommend you have a listen. And I'll let you just do that, and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Scottie, it's an absolute honour and pleasure to have you on the show, sir. And it's amazing to have an artist come all the way from the other side of the world and happen to be in Australia when we talk.
Great to be here with you, David. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, no, I'm really excited to speak with you. And so I thought we'd kick off. I mean, in a couple of weeks, you've got a new album coming out, which I've had the pleasure of listening to, and it is truly amazing. We'll talk about that. But just tell us a little bit about what the last 12 months have been like for you generally, as far as how busy you've been, the recording of the album, and what else you've been up to the last year or so.
Oh, it's been an incredibly busy time coming, to the end of this album. Recording with the Budapest Scoring Orchestra took place on this album remotely in July. And then we moved forward with vocals and other overdubs of orchestral percussion back in Minneapolis. So then I think we finally finished mixing and mastering right about Christmas time. And so, of course, it was just, busy. And then started up touring again with Ruthie Foster, who I'm out here with now, I'd say about end of January. So, it's been an active, recording, finishing the album, lots of shows around the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, where I reside. And then again, picking up touring with Ruthie.
Yeah, no, busy 12 months. So let's talk about the album. So tell us about what, and I mean, this is obviously I think it's your 13th album, so you're far from an amateur at recording albums, but what was the impetus this time for deciding to record Hello Pain? What was sort of the approach you wanted to take with this one, and so on?
I was collecting the songs, and as I would write and finish a song, the production and the concept behind the album, of course, starts to take shape. So as the collection of songs were finishing, each song that I would finish, I was so excited to get to the production side. They, lend themselves, once a song is finished, to, okay, how do you want this to sound? And I was really eager to get to orchestrating. So, of course, with my Pro Tools, my native plugins and Complete, and different software and sampling packages and string packages, I created this orchestral bed. And I thought, now I've done it, because, I don't want to do it digitally. I want to have real human beings. And so now I've done it. I've put myself in a place where I know now I want a large scale orchestra. So that moved forward then with the help of friends that came through, because we didn't know how in the world we would afford this. And a friend came through and helped us cross this threshold of, working with Budapest. And then my arranger, Sierra Elise Hill, who's a violinist I work with, was like, okay, green light. So I'm going to make them big. How big? And we're like 20, 30, 40 strings. So we ended up with 40 strings and I think 12 winds and all the external auxiliary percussion and French horns, clarinets, flutes. So it was wonderful to see it come to life, really kind of a miracle, like a lifetime dream of mine to work with a larger orchestra. having worked with digital orchestration all my life with various programming, as you probably can relate, it's like, are we sampling this or are we getting a real cello, please? Yeah.
I'm interested, Scottie, the logistics of that. So you mentioned the Budapest Scoring Orchestra recorded remotely. So what are the logistics of what, and I know you mentioned your arranger probably had to provide a lot of the stuff, but how do you get the orchestra the stuff they need to do what they do, and how do they supply it back to you?
So a friend of mine led me to Budapest Scoring, where then the curator there and I worked hand in hand on the exact arrangement of players first. So then Sierra worked out the scores and just to perfection. So parts for each player, conductor scores, all to perfection, endings, diminuendos, all mapped out. Like no studio fades on this entire album. They're all natural diminuendos with a notation on the score, count to 7 off on 7. Logistically, I wasn't able to go and be in Budapest in person. So the studio I work with, Wild Sound in Minneapolis with Steve Call Engineering, and the people in Budapest are accustomed and have in the past worked together remotely. So, of course, that's nerve-wracking. You think it's going to be a train wreck. We're going to do this on Zoom. But sure enough, we sent the scores 3 days in advance. The entire orchestra was there. With the time change, we were ready to go at 7 a.m., and I'm telling you, at 7 a.m. and 2 seconds, they were cracking into the first song, Awake and Willing, and we just went, okay. So true professionals and accustomed to doing film score work remotely, et cetera. I couldn't believe how well it came off. So they're in Rottenbiller Studios, a huge sound stage. We've got monitors of each other. We can see each other. Their control room, fully professional with engineers to boot, they would take a cut and then they would ask us if we had any questions or any changes or fixes and so we would be able to have a moment then to say, oh, it's beautiful at bar 64. Would you run that one more time and hold that a little longer? And so that was some of the inside work. But I'm telling you, they really knocked it out. The whole album, 10 songs, fully orchestrated in 4 hours, I think.
Wow.
4.5 hours. And then an hour later, we received the files from them in Dropbox. So I should back up real quick. We laid out rough vocal, piano with me, drums with my drummer, Greg Schutte, and upright bass with my bassist, Dan Carpel. So we laid out a trio demo with a click mapped throughout the entire song, and each of them listened through headphones while they read along. Yeah.
Great. Now that's amazing. It's so fascinating to hear how that works remotely and that it works so well. So let's talk about the album itself. So the obvious thing is it's a fascinating title, let alone the themes throughout the album. So Hello Pain. What was the impetus for calling it? And the title track is amazing, but just talk about that a little bit.
Thanks. That's kind of you. Yeah, it came about through, in essence, emotional and physical pain. When I wrote the tune, it was the dead of winter in Minneapolis, and I had tried to move my Yamaha U1 down the hallway to make room for new carpet to be put in my rental house. And I fractured a vertebrae in my back. So I was just in agony, almost like immobilized. It was pretty rough for a few months there. At the same time, I was also going through a breakup from a long-term relationship. And so it was an intense time of sort of emotional and physical pain. And yet I recalled something one of my good friends, spiritual advisor, friend of mine, told me once. I had some other health issues 5 years ago, and I went to him looking for a little bit of sympathy, Oh man, I've got a nerve injury in my neck, because I did. I had another nerve related vertebrae injury in my neck that just about took my right arm out of commission. So I'm grateful to have come back from that. But I think that's what it was. And I went to him looking, oh man, Bill, looking for some sympathy. And he just, instead of kind of giving me sympathy, he said, hello, pain, and I'm like, Bill, that's really cold, man. But, I understand and understood how he was welcoming the pain. Without it, we can't see joy. Without it, we can't. It's the yin and yang. And so learning to embrace pain, and then we chatted about that concept later. I said I made its way into a tune. Is it okay if I use it? And we conversed about it a little more, and he attributed it to you remember the show The Honeymooners?
Yes.
With Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, and the golfing episode. And Art Carney would bring Jackie out to the golf course, and when you golf, you got to address the ball. Hello, ball, And so it's got a touch of levity and humor behind it rather than hello, pain, this dark gothic. Yeah, it's kind of depressing, I'll admit, but it is meant to embrace it as a touchstone to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, throughout the whole album, it's certainly not, I need to emphasize for our listeners and viewers, it's just not a super dark album from end to end. It's far from that. It's got amazing emotions and light and shade throughout. And so I'd love you to talk a little bit more about that, Scotty. I mean, just even from the opening track, Just Checking In, I really like the feel and the positiveness, I would argue, of that to some extent. Underneath the Black Oaks is probably my favourite, and it's obviously got lots of light and shade. Just tell us, how they all came together, and you're obviously happy with the outcome.
Yes, very happy with the outcome, and thank you. Yeah, it's kind of like if you look at the vinyl side one is more of the relationship ending departure of that. Side two, as you flip it, is reemerging, and embracing. Becoming Awake and Willing is the name of another tune. Underneath the Black Oaks is embracing the possibility of new love. And so I ran song orders multiple times for how I wanted the song order to go, and I ended up going with exactly how the album was written. Just Checking In and Hello Pain come first, as they were the first in order of my writing process. So I ended up sticking right to that, and it worked out okay. I'm really pleased with that. There's another song, Black Oaks, and then there's Balance, Finding Balance, as a little bit more of a jazz approach. So that's all about, finding balance, living life on life's terms, and I would say the reemerging side, probably, I don't know, it's just some of my favorites are in there. Black Oaks is one of my favorites. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
I met this girl in Northern California at the Kate Wolf Folk Festival, and she just blew my mind, and we connected, but I was in a relationship then, and we honored that, of course. And so, but 5-6 years later, I went back to play that festival, and she came by, and it was lovely. I'm like, oh my God. Now I'm single. This relationship of mine has ended. I thought, it's destiny. I'm going to move out to California, and we'll make babies and save redwood trees. And so, turns out she's now happily involved. And I'm like, okay, destiny was never in our hands, and other lyrics that made their way into that song, God interrupting plans. So I've been playing that one quite a bit on this Australian tour, opening for some of Ruthie's shows. Having a lot of fun with it.
And I can see why you would particularly like that one, Scott. I mean, you mentioned about Finding Balance having a jazz influence, and this one has some beautiful piano work in it, and that's probably a good segue to go back to your start. So, I mean, you started to some extent in classical and jazz. What was your first sort of development in music and leading up to early adulthood?
Yes, you nailed it. I started traditional piano lessons when I was 6 years old, and I joined band and played trumpet and evolved into playing some tuba. I was playing guitar. I was really into a lot of rock and blues on the guitar angle while I had my traditional piano lessons going, but evolved into, more jazz studies in, say, junior high school age. And as you said, then attended Berklee, where it's everything. So jazz, majority of it is in jazz studies, but of course your classical and traditional are kept up with. So then after Berklee, I basically, I came back to the Twin Cities. I joined a band, and then that evolved into other original project and other original bands from there that were all over the musical radar. So we were doing funk and R&B and you know, at the time, and through my 20s, I suppose we were doing like everything from Earth, Wind and Fire to, Prince stuff to, uh, a lot of really like cool production stuff that I was able to get involved with as a keyboardist, right? So I recall that band having two giant racks on stage, a DX7, some other Kurzweil, and an Atari computer. So I had like micro floppy disks going with the computer monitor and the racks and all this sequencing. So all the horn parts and percussion and string work were all sequenced in with a click track running through headphones to the drummer. And if it crashed, remember they did see the little cannonballs would appear on the monitor and fill the screen, and you were down. So you had to have a keyboard live to get through that and reboot. So I evolved through those years, having a lot of fun in more of the pop, funk, R&B dance mode with a big 8-piece band and, choreographed dance. And after that, I got
just before you move on there, Scotty, because you've raised a really fascinating point, which I was going to ask about at some stage. Minneapolis, renowned for its music scene, particularly in that sort of funk R&B. And so obviously that was an influence. Not that you couldn't escape, because that sounds negative, because it's incredible positive, but you were obviously incredibly influenced in those early years by what was such an amazing scene. Prince obviously being one of the icons, but lots of other stuff going on.
Yeah, huge influence. Prince and Time and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were right down the road. And so what they were doing with Janet Jackson and Jelly Bean Johnson and bands from the Twin Cities that were so inspiring and so actually supportive of us and our young band, getting together, opening some shows for different bands in that scene. I mean, it was a great time for us as a young band because we were being, embraced by these people like, Tommy Barbarella, keyboardist for Prince and the MPG, Sonny T, bass player, Michael Bland, the drummer. We were there the night that the news came that they were picked up by Prince to create NPG, New Power Generation. We were like there that night, and everybody was just so excited for them. So just, big influences musically, which definitely with classical and jazz influences and then broadening into these different areas it's helped me as a, really well-rounded, like a master of none, but dip my toes into all, because after that, it started to turn to more folk, more blues, more boogie, more New Orleans piano stuff of my first solo albums around 2001. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. And so tell us about sort of the move from what came next for you as far as those early bands in Minneapolis to what you came to as far as your own solo work and other bands you started to get involved with.
So there was that period, and then I had an opportunity to start writing and recording some original stuff, which I was just really eager to ditch all the sequencing, sampling gear, all the technology. I was eager to got a new acoustic guitar and a mandolin, and started just recording songs on guitar, mandolin, and piano, just straight up. So I was yearning to get into more, folk and blues, and time to ditch the hairspray and get into some organic stuff, So from there, I had a moment of a few years where I joined a blues band, Big John Dickerson and Blue Chamber, which was an amazing performer. Big John, rest in peace. And the band was steeped in blues and hired me as their keyboardist. We did a lot of traveling in Europe, recorded a couple albums, Arms of the Blues being one of them. So I started to contribute as a songwriter to some of that. So I started to really turn another corner into blues, getting back to more roots music. Then after a few years, I left the Big John Dickerson band. And that's where I began around 2000, 2001, my first solo recording, The Other Side, which is like very much a barrel house piano, I was definitely listening to all the New Orleans stuff more and more, Professor Longhair, Dr. John, Alan Toussaint, the Meters, James Booker and being heavily influenced by that, but on the northern end of the Mississippi River, you know. So I have a lot of friends down south that are like, you don't sound like you're from around here, you sound like a Yank, and I'm like, yeah, but it's the same river. So I've always attributed that thread to I don't know what attracts me so much to New Orleans music. So that turned that corner into the new Scottie Miller band. First recording came out. I'm evolving into barrel house and blues piano centered music. I wanted to be able to go out and just have me sing and on a piano and make people dance without needing a band even. So it came from that premise. And it moved forward through then with, of course, the rest of my albums, arcing into, I think, a lot of blues, but always jazz and classically influenced. You mentioned the first song, even on this new orchestral album, Just Checking In. It's very much a much more Americana type vibe.
Yeah.
That was a big turning corner, right? So around that same, around 2005, I met Johnny B. Good, Johnny Johnson, great player, piano player for Chuck Berry and his own solo career too, down in St. Louis. And we became friends, and then he passed away.
Yeah.
Very shortly thereafter. I tend to meet, unfortunately, if you're a legend, don't come meet me because they pass away right after I meet them. I mean, it's just crazy. So anyway, Johnny Johnson came to a couple of my shows. Then I played his memorial, and I met Bo Diddley and friends. Okay. And then Bo's management asked if I would want to come along on a tour, U.S. tour, and we have Ruthie Foster opening the tour. And that is how I met Ruthie around 2006, touring with her for 2 months on the Bo Diddley and Friends U.S. tour. And then she asked me to join her band around 2007-8. So since then, I've been splitting my career with my solo career and touring with Ruthie.
Yep. No, beautifully summarized. Now, obviously, I'm not going to let you get away without talking about Bo Diddley there, and we're about to go in depth about Ruthie as well. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he's an architect of rock and roll, Bo Diddley. What was your learning, in spite of you had a fair bit of experience under your belt by that stage? What was that like for you as far as a player and what you learned?
Big thing that I learned was to step up and step back, play with fire or pad, 2 notes or full bore.
Yeah.
And that was a big element to that because, Bo was getting up there in years. He's a legend. He's up there, and there's times where you really want to hit it and rock and roll all out. And then there's other times you just really want to hey, all eyes on, of course, the singer is the most important. So that's one aspect of what I learned. I also learned a lot of things about patience and with touring and pacing yourself and having a good time, but not too much of a good time. And then, studying the different songs through his catalog, of course, brings you through, a great history book of organ and piano work, right? Something as simple as the end of a tune where you're kind of just hitting a high triad, in a higher octave on the piano to take a tune out, simplistic, but just what they were recording back then, and it might be a very simplistic 2-note or 3-note triad that you're hitting on a high octave. There's lots of examples of that. And I remember Roadrunner, and it was so fun to play. And I think the band consisted of guitar, drums, bass, another guitar, and then Bo up front. And so again, you really learn to listen to Bo and where he was going vocally. He's getting up there in years too, so he might talk for a while, he might stretch something out. And so you just really learn to be on your toes, but not over eager either, Yeah. It's again, with the push and pull thing, I think it's a really important thing. that I've learned, not just from Bo, from Big John Dickerson, a lot of different people that I've worked with, where less is more generally. Mm-hmm.
Exactly right. No, well put. No, thank you for the insights into that. And so let's talk about Ruthie. I mean, you've been her keyboard player and I believe musical director for, as you said, since you joined in that era. So just that's a hell of a career with any artist. So tell me about how you two, the rapport you've built, your approach over the years, what's evolved, just how you approach that gig overall.
So Ruthie, when she approached me to play the first gig, I, of course, studied her entire catalog and made charts and tried to really ingest as much of her entire catalog as I could. And so I'm listening to previous recordings and what other keyboardists had done. I'm listening to songs that didn't have any keyboards, but that was the first step. And then, getting the first few gigs under my belt was basically playing piano, Wurlitzer, and Hammond, And so that's where I got even further into sort of splitting my brain and splitting my hands up, right? Left hand on the Hammond and right over here doing piano is how I like to set up at a 90-degree angle, rather than stacked. That's just something I'm more comfortable with, splitting the left to the right, And, man, again, with that less is more thing, Ruthie's such a great singer and a great songwriter. And so, again, there are songs where, like, one of her staple tunes is Phenomenal Woman, which is a Maya Angelou poem. And it was first recorded and set to music by Amy Skye, Canadian writer. And then Ruthie, it's become one of Ruthie's most staple tunes. But like the intro, she just lets me take it, She wants me to just take my time, and I do. And it's a beautiful thing because I can improvise a different intro, sometimes a few minutes, based on the vibe of the moment, which is a blessing. So that's a tune I can stretch out a little bit more in. And then, of course, I do a lot of soloing where I stretch out. But then there's times where, hey, tuck it into a 2-note voicing on the organ, very simplistic Wurlitzer, stay behind the vocal and underneath and out of the way of the vocal, so that comes up again. I hear myself saying it like, wow, okay, yeah.
No, so thank you for that. And I'm just speaking of keyboard rigs, I thought we might do, I'd love to hear about your keyboard rig with Ruthie Foster and, how you keep stability into it, because I know you had a fascinating experience at one stage of opening for the late Ray Manzarek, but I'll let you tell the story and then tell us about your rig.
Yeah, man, Ray Manzarek, my hero. God bless his soul. I went to see, I opened for him at the Dakota Jazz Club in Minneapolis. And I had the honor to open the show. So that went well. And now I get to sit in the audience and watch his show. And he's got a Yamaha motive up there, the big tanker. And he's got some lyrics in a notebook open on the panel, laying on the buttons. And so mid-set, somehow, of course, something got touched. And keyboard is not doing anything. There's no sound. He's lost his piano sound, who knows what it went into, edit mode and whatnot. And he was dead in the water. He's like, does anybody know how to fix this thing? And I'm like, please, not me, because I'm not sure I know how to fix it because I don't know what he hit, so I waited for a minute before I just jumped up to help, but nobody was responding. So what do? So I went up and I got behind Ray and hunched over his shoulders. And I'm like, oh my God, it's Ray. Ray and I are like hand in hand here. And thank God I found whatever he had done and hit exit and got out and, reset back to the main piano patch he was using. It wasn't too much of a deal. And got it back. And I was so relieved, and Ray was like, yeah, nice job. And I hopped back off the stage out into the audience. So that was great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it just shows you the importance of a rig. So with Ruthie, what is your touring rig that you use? How simple, complex is it? And how do you keep it rock solid?
I use B3, C3, C2, different Hammonds with a 122 Leslie 95% of the time. When we can't get a real organ backlined or up the stairs or whatever it is, I'll use various digital organs, usually a Hammond X series or occasionally a Nord organ series. Okay. And if we can, I'll run it through a Trek 2 adapter to a real 122 or 147 Leslie. If not, in the worst case scenario, you're using that built-in Leslie or maybe a ventilator. If you're lucky, you've got a ventilator pedal or something to give you a little more breadth of sound. And then, so that's the organ rig. And then either a Nord Stage 3 or 4, typically. And I carry my laptop with Nord Sound Manager, and I load up my bundles before the show, and that's essentially it. That's my main rig, and then I play a little bit of mandolin on the Ruthie shows, so that's on standby for 2 or 3 songs each show with a Baggs DI and K&K pickups and my new beautiful Northfield mandolin that I just got, an F style with a wider nut and a bigger fret width for my aging hands. But yeah, that's essentially the rig. And then, of course, so programming at home to prepare for those, depending on the content. So there's multiple albums I have stored in each bundle, right? The Grammy-winning album of hers, Mileage, from last year, there's a lot of Texas horns on there, and I don't like, doing horns on keys, but I got some pretty nice samples from the Nord library, and I've stacked some pretty nice full horn sounds, to sort of tuck in and emulate the horns of the live album. I got a lot of layering going on. There's programs where I've got Wurlitzer on the low octave, transposed up and then fading into piano here and go up another octave or two, and I've got the horns there, and maybe I take that 4th octave to save it for like a glockenspiel sound, etc. And I like Nord how they can crossfade through the layering, which is really handy, and volume pedal is essential because then I can go to another bank and with all that stacked also bring in some strings halfway through a tune. You know the deal there, right? So there's that volume pedal being so important to all of the control of the dynamics of the strings or the horns pushing in and popping, or so that is the work I do at home to try to emulate the album as close as possible, and then carry that with me and upload, before each show.
No, great workflow. And I mean, I need to ask, given you're currently touring Australia, I can't imagine you doing a B3 or C3 around Australia. I'd be gobsmacked if you were.
Not everywhere. Yeah,
No.
I'm only really the bigger festivals. We've got a couple different digitals at these upcoming shows this weekend. Brunswick Ballroom, it's a big staircase, so there'll be a digital organ for that. And Mimo Hall and Minion are up next.
Yeah.
And so, I think we're using digitals for all that, digital organs.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And I mean, as you're probably aware, Scotty, B3s and C3s aren't quite as ubiquitous in Australia as they are in other areas. So they're around, but they're a little bit harder to grab too. So no, totally understand that.
Yeah, pretty tricky.
And as sort of what for you does a musical director role involved with Ruthie Foster? We've talked with many guests that, the term musical director is so broad. It can be, a whole bunch of different things. In context of what you do, what's that role involve?
Right. Basically it's more based around the production that I'm doing and, trying to center around the recording of the album. And then, perhaps I'll chime in or write a quick chart for a new tune or chime in on an arrangement as the band gets together and starts fleshing these out. Whereas like Larry Fulcher, our bassist from Phantom Blues Band, who's a, multi-Grammy winning producer and insane musician, his strength is vocal harmonies. So he's kind of handling that. And directing that, if you will, more than anyone, Ruthie and Larry. And so I suppose my main duties revolve around trying to recreate the sound of the album and the arrangements and, honoring that at the core to try to, have that in the landscape. But then from there, the band is going to hopefully open it up and change and turn it into our own thing. So I'm doing a little bit of balancing of like, yeah, that's cool. We got the horns come in there, but let's not, or, it sounds too cheesy. Let's leave the horns out. And hey, let's just keep it on Wurlitzer and Hammond. And, so I would say that's probably the extent. It's not full-blown musical director as if I was leading a big band or something like that. Everybody in this band is just an insanely talented musician. Brannon Temple on drums and Ruthie herself. It's, you've got musical directors galore in this band.
And so, Scottie, I know you've been incredibly open, especially in your poetry and music, about your past struggles with sort of depression, alcohol and drug addiction. And as you know, you've lived it. The music industry often romanticizes substance use. How did you navigate breaking away from that environment while maintaining your career as a hugely successful musician?
Yeah, I definitely had my years of ripping and running, and am lucky to have lived through it. For me, it's not for everybody. For me, it was a dead end street. Something had to change, or I wouldn't be where I am. I'd be dead or in jail, or I certainly wouldn't probably have these gigs I get. So for me personally, something needed to change because the partying, I don't have an off switch, So I just want to go nonstop, never quit. Let's go, rock and roll. So I was really lucky to find support from friends, from recovery program, and that, got me back on track. And I'm very tied into that to this day, over 18 years in recovery. It's obviously paramount to my life, to my vibrance in the music world, because it took a little bit. At first, I'll admit, going back to touring after getting sober was challenging, but I got used to it and I stayed in touch with my support group, and I would find meetings around the world and different things like that and be on the phone with friends back home. And as I started to get more comfortable, I'm just so grateful. I'm really lucky and really blessed that this obsession was lifted, to where it didn't consume my mind all the time. Like, when can I get a drink? Or, oh my God, I can't stay away from it, or whatever. And so I feel supremely grateful for that. I got over the hump, and then just, continue to work with helping other people find recovery. And I think that is, that's a big part of continuing sobriety and recovery over a long period, is trying to work and help with others to stay out of my own head.
Yeah.
Same thing with the mental health bit. Yeah, I've struggled with depression and chronic depression and anxiety all my life. And I've been down SSRI med road for years, And so I have a team, I have a family and a community in the recovery area. I have a therapist, an acupuncturist, a psychiatrist, you know what I mean? And so the mental health portion, also, again, working with other people to try to get out of my own, out of selfishness, out of self, thinking more about others, to keep my mind occupied and to be helpful. So meditation, prayer, more exercise, trying to eat better, less coffee in the morning, and I'm not perfect at it, but I'm really grateful for it. And I try to stay involved with that in any way that I can. When you're on tour nonstop, it's pretty tricky to catch a meeting or whatever it is that you're doing. But I have other ways that I stay in touch on the phone with sponsors and sponsees and people. I just try to reach out once or twice a day to somebody back home and get some grounding. Try to take a moment in the morning before we launch off into the air or in the van, and take a moment and try to work on focusing on staying out of self and thinking more about others than myself, and how I might be helpful.
That's absolutely amazing. You sort of I've already answered one of my next questions, which was how do you manage on tour? And also you mentioned earlier with the Hello Pain album being influenced by relationship breakup and everything else. I mean, there are challenging times for anyone, let alone anyone in recovery, although it seems like you've got really firm boundaries in place. You've got a lot of years of recovery time under your belt. I know it never gets easier, but to some extent, does that familiarity with those boundaries help you maintain them?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's like you mentioned, Hello Pain again. That song also, it sort of draws a comparison between the relationship loss and the loss of, what's the line? Hello pain. I miss the way you made me feel, every part of my body and soul. It kind of does reminisce to, when you're dealing with pain or tragedy or something, the old default was to go and grab a drug or a drink, to deal with it, to cope with it. And so now not having that, that's where it's like living life on life's terms. Okay, this is real. And finding other tools, right, to deal with that pain. And so it's definitely a big part of my songwriting. Those messages come through. And hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does beautifully. No, if there's a keyboard player listening right now who is struggling with addiction but is afraid to ask for help because they'll fear it'll ruin their gigging life or their career, what would you say to them?
Oh, I would say, bless your soul first. Like, hang in there. I think we have to find what works for us, what we need to do for our own sanity and our own well-being. So when something's hurting you more than helping you, right? It's time for a change, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed to reach out for help, and I need to open my mind up enough to accept that help and take direction from somebody else who it was working for. So that sponsor or that counselor or that therapist or that friend or whoever that is or that treatment program, to reach out and try to open up enough to surrender to taking guidance. So my way of thinking and my ego and my self-will has say, perhaps if you're struggling, it's run amok. Your self-will and your instincts have gone a little bit too far for your own good, right? Or for my own good. And so that's where I really recommend trying to just open up your mind and your heart to someone else's ideas on what to do, right? Somebody else who's got recovery and had it and worked with other people. If you can seek out somebody that's inspiring that way and it can help, that's a start.
I know many musicians feel that getting sober might dull the creative edge, and you're living proof that that's not the case. How did your relationship with the piano and music evolve during your recovery?
Yeah, at first, like for probably 6 months to a year of my sort of when I first got into recovery, it was weird. It was like, oh man, am I going to lose my creative edge writing? And it was a little janky, a little chunky. But over time, I started to get the wheels greased again and things got smoother. And then I started to notice how much more truthful and real my lyrics were coming out. Okay. So not that they weren't before, but I felt like it was just more succinct, more truthful, more fluid to reality. And, and so I was inspired by that. And then as a player, whatever, I don't judge. It's like, you got to do what works for you again, but as a player, it reached a point for me where there was quality decline. There were plenty of years where we could party like animals and go up on stage and party through the show, before the show, through the show, after the show, and just rip it, at least as far as I recall. We were pretty tight, or I was, but it starts to turn a corner, right? And start to get sloppy. I start to get late, start to get, naughty, and so there's another corner of playing now sober and starting to do live shows and that adrenaline rush and all that goes with that. It's just something to get used to. That's all. But now I found that I was more accurate. I was more tight. I was playing tighter. I was playing clean. And so it's the same thing as with the lyrics, right? I had to grease the wheels and just get used to it. But the outcome was far better than what was happening at the end of those years of partying.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, again, thank you for the insights there.
I wouldn't have the gigs I've had. I wouldn't have the Ruthie gig. I wouldn't have maintained a, 18, 20-year career out here touring if I were still doing it. There's no way.
No,
Yeah.
no, it takes its toll for sure.
Yeah.
We're on our last few questions, Scottie, but here's a nice, easy one for you. An existential question. What impact do you want to make in music?
I love that question. Oh, man. I believe that freedom of expression through art, through music, through expression, especially with music, I believe that the vibrations that are created can create change, can inspire peace, equality, less violence, less war, less greed, and inspire change through inspiration, right? Like, I hope for that, and I believe it does work. I do. I believe in it wholeheartedly. That, the vibrations of the music, whether it's listening to a recorded album or if it's out performing live, that reverberates through the world and through the universe, and I think it makes a change. I really believe that is very important to me, whether you're huge, whether you're big and famous, whether you're total indie artist like me, you know what I mean? I believe it can make a change, and I hope that it continues to work that way. We look for inspiration as a singer-songwriter, as a musician. We're looking for inspiration, right? Constantly hoping to feel inspired in order to express ourselves. And then when we do, I hope that is inspiring to the person on the other side, because without that, you don't have reciprocal effect. So it goes both ways. So I see that working, especially in a live show where you see the reciprocation going. That's the title of one of my albums, as you might know. That's the premise behind it, because then there's change and inspiration that builds and continues to grow to a whole new level that you weren't familiar with before, or you didn't know existed, so that kind of sums up where I hope this music takes us all to better times.
No, it certainly does do that. No, I really appreciate that. And then speaking of music influencing others, I'm fascinated to hear your Desert Island Disc. So 5 albums that have had a big influence on your life.
Yeah. Oh, man. I love that question, too. One of my favorites that I just can't get, I listen to all the time is Donny Hathaway. Okay. It's just, I can't get it. I'll never stop listening to it. Anything from Nina Simone. I love the very best. I think the very best of, or whatever, I think has Sugar in My Bowl, and the song Consummation is my all-time favorite Nina Simone song, where she does the 10th octave with the clarinet and the vocal. And Dr. John's Going Back to New Orleans is always top in my playlist, or anything from Mac. Contemporary classical composer from Latvia, Pēteris Vasks, V-A-S, Viatore, traveler, wayfarer. It's this, I hope I'm pronouncing Viator or Viatore. Viatore it's a song. It's like this droning melody. It's very basic, and it's really built on dynamics. It starts way down, and then it just gets huge, and then it comes all the way back down. And I'm telling you, I don't know how many thousands of times I've listened to it. It's like meditative to me. It takes me to another place. I've heard it 1,000 times, and it still does it for me. So check out Pēteris Vasks, Latvian classical contemporary composer. And then I'd say my 5th favorite would be, I just listened to it on the flight up from Adelaide to Melbourne yesterday, was Otis Spann's I Want to Go Home. With Muddy on guitar, right? So, I was digging into that on the flight yesterday, and I was half asleep and half into what was Muddy playing through there, along with Otis Spann's just buttery, beautiful voice and insane piano playing. And I was so deep into it, I was half asleep, and then the flight attendant came by and was like, excuse me, sir. open your window shade, we're landing. And I was like, oh, I'm deep in the solo here on Muddy and Otis. Stop.
Yeah.
Those are my faves.
No, I love it. They're amazing 5 picks. And look, I mean, I can't thank you enough, Scottie. Your level of insight, into your life journey and how that's translated into music is nothing short of incredible. The new album is also incredible, and I'm certainly hoping lots and lots of people get to hear it and be influenced by it. And I really appreciate you spending the hour with us. It's hugely appreciated.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate the time with you, and especially when we're in your beautiful country. It's a pleasure. Thank you, my friend.
And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did speaking with Scottie. What a career, and what deep insights on a whole range of aspects of creativity, musicianship, and life in general. So I can't thank Scottie enough for his time. And do check out Hello Pain. I've listened to it start to finish, and it's just such a beautiful album. I mean, the Budapest Scoring Orchestra play a key role there, but this album would well and truly stand up on its own with just Scottie's vocals and piano, I would argue. So yeah, definitely please do have a look, and we've got a link in the show notes to it. So a huge thank you to you for listening as always. Really appreciate it. And a big shout out to our gold and silver supporters who have either signed up to support us on either Patreon, Substack, or as a YouTube member. If you are watching on YouTube, you'll see the little join button just below this video. It does make a world of difference to keeping this little boat afloat. So thank you for considering. So our current gold and silver supporters are the wonderful Tammy Catch from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you as always, Tammy. Derry Evans from the beautiful land of Wales. Cannot thank him enough. As well as always, Dave Bryce and the team at the musicplayer.com forums. Always appreciate their support. The brilliant Paul Heaton, or Dreamscapist. Do check out Dreamscapist on YouTube, an amazing channel full of brilliant music from not just an ambient viewpoint, but although I'm an ambient composer myself, so I love it. There's lots to enjoy there. So, music for just general relaxation, enjoyment, meditation, sleep, you name it. The Dreamscapist has it. So can't thank Paul enough for his support. And last but not least, Mike Wilcox at Midnight Mastering. If you are creating your own work and need a great job done on some mixing and mastering, Midnight Mastering is the way to go. So again, thank you for listening. We'll be back in a week or so. And until then, keep on playing.